Hello and welcome to another video on World War II. Today we will be giving you stories on the topic of genocide. We will be covering multiple different perspectives of people that experienced concentration camps personally. These concentration camps were not limited to only Germany and Auschwitz. They were in multiple countries. This information is important so we can learn from our mistakes and prevent it from happening again. We hope that people of all ages will be able to gain something from these stories that will influence the future in a positive way. In order, we will have the stories of Anna, a Polish girl, Przemysl from Czechoslovakia, Irene from Hungary, and Oscar from Germany.
Anna is a Polish girl who was taken from her home and put into a concentration camp. She talks about how her brother was sent to a concentration camp and how he escaped, but only to be recaptured with his wife. We found out later that his wife had passed away from a disease, and her brother was also killed during a compulsory march. This to me shows just how bad the people who were put in the concentration camps had it. Besides the fact that they had been separated from their families and don't know if they're dead or alive, but they are not getting their illness treated, which means that they have to suffer until said illness kills them. Anna then talks about how her own concentration camp was transported into the depths of Germany. But during that winter, she and her two friends escaped, heading back to Poland. She describes how they escaped due to a guard not attending his post because of a riot by the prisoners. She then tells us how she and her friends were helped by a man when they didn't have any shelter. We found out that when they got back to Poland, there were hardly any Jews there, but a family they knew was still living there, so they stayed with them for a few months. She would later move to Israel, and she's lived there since. This story shows how waiting for an opening and taking it can lead to something great.
Przemysl was born in Turnov, Czech in 1913. He was arrested in 1941 for helping Jews and had taken on a train to Linz, where he was cuffed and taken to an officer who called him and the others enemies of the Führer. This made everyone in the train station angry and come over to spit on them. The officers told Tobias and the others that they needed some people who knew how to feed pigs and would go to the farms every day to take care of them. They said that they needed someone who was from a farm and spoke German. Most of the people that volunteered mostly wanted to get out of the hard work ahead of them at the internment camps. The officer chose 20 of them to work on the farms, but when he brought them to leave, another officer told him that there were too many, so the officer pushed 2 Spaniards back and he pushed Tobias back. Tobias was so excited to be able to work on a farm that he lied to the officer that he was born on a farm and that all he'd done for his entire life was feed pigs, but the officer kicked Tobias back, leaving a mark on his leg that remains there today. The officer finally got 20 people down to a dozen or so and told them to turn right and march down to the farm. The farm part of the camp was separated by a line of guards with machine guns that guarded the edges of the camp. Tobias and the others that were left behind watched with envy as they marched down to the farm happily. All of a sudden, Tobias heard machine gun shots from both sides and looked over to see all of the prisoners going to work at the farm dead. The officer turned back to Tobias and his fellow prisoners and said while laughing, "Who else knows how to feed pigs?" When I first read the end of this story, my brain felt numb. I'd never heard such a horrible thing to happen to a group of people. If I was Przemysl Tobias, that experience would probably never have left my head. I wouldn't be able to stop thinking about how close I was to death and how cruel the people running the internment camps were.
Irene Fogel was born in 1930 in Czechoslovakia. Her father owned a lumber yard, but after Czechoslovakia was broken up, her area was put under Hungarian rule, and her father was sent into a forced labor brigade. Jews were not allowed to go to school or own businesses. After her father came back, Irene's family and others were moved to a brick factory that was obviously not made to house people. In the next 2 months, 400,000 Jews would be moved from Hungary to Auschwitz, including Irene and her family. Immediately at arrival, Irene's mom, 3 younger siblings, and her older brother were killed. It was only Irene, her sister, and her dad left. Irene and her sister were sent to work in a labor camp, while her dad was put into a group tasked with removing and cremating bodies from the gas chambers. While in Auschwitz, Irene and her sister, Serena, found 2 of their aunts and learned that they were the only ones left to survive to their knowledge. During their time in Auschwitz, one of her aunts became ill and was killed by the Nazis, as anyone that was unable to work was deemed a waste of resources. Irene and her sister and her aunt were moved from camp to camp until being liberated by Soviet troops in 1945. After being liberated, they found an uncle that had been spared from the horrors of the German concentration camps and stayed with him, even going back to school and moving to Virginia in 1959. I thought this story was important because it shows how entire families were decimated by the concentration camps.
My story is of Oscar, who was 21 years old and worked as a guard at Auschwitz. He grew up in Germany and gave his experience of growing up in Germany and eventually working at Auschwitz. Oscar was born in 1921 in Lower Saxony. He was the son of a skilled textile worker, and after Germany's defeat in World War I, his father joined an extremely nationalist group, partially due to his business going bankrupt. Oscar was heavily influenced by his father's nationalist stance, and in the 1930s, young Oscar joined a youth organization. After that, he transitioned easily into becoming a Hitler Youth. German youths who grew up after World War II were probably heavily influenced by their family, and as a result adopted their views on Jews in the state of Germany, so becoming a Hitler Youth probably made the most sense to them. He had a dream to become part of an elite German unit, mainly the Waffen-SS. His father, even with his nationalist beliefs, did not want his son to go to war, but he joined them anyway. And after a year of being a bookkeeper for the Waffen-SS, he was placed in a new position. He took a train to, at the time, an unknown location and was told to keep all of this top secret. When he got there, he saw it was an internment camp. At first, he thought it was a standard internment camp, but after a while at Auschwitz, he realized the truth and was astonished. He was appalled at what was going on at Auschwitz, but after working several months as a money manager, the work became routine to him. At Auschwitz, he was not constantly exposed to the killings that were happening because of the job he had. He stated that he would usually look the other way when he saw these bad things happening, but one day, he was told to report to one of the gas chambers. He was in shock of what was happening, but he justified in his mind that we are at war and those are the enemies. He continued to work as a money manager at Auschwitz with no remorse or empathy for the foreign enemies that were being killed. This perspective is an eye-opener for me. You usually do not get the perspective of a German soldier, but it is necessary all the same. This 21-year-old had seen all these horrible things that had happened, but in the story, he just dismisses them because he thought they were justified. The heavy propaganda shown to these young Germans obviously had an effect, and I think that the young men in Germany back then truly believed that what was happening was for the good of Germany. This story gives a perspective that many are reluctant to, but it's still important if you want to see the whole picture.
Thanks for watching our informative videos on World War II. We hope you enjoyed the other videos of our series and maybe even learned something. But it's important to remember that the effects of the war lasted much longer than the 4 years when the fighting took place. From dividing the former Nazi Empire into East and West Germany to the rise of nuclear weapons, World War II is still prevalent in our world today. If you still want to know more about World War II, you can go to the description and there find links to more World War II stories.